Joe Biden was not mentally sound enough to stand for re-election as President of the United States. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of George Clooney. Take the word of Nancy Pelosi. Take the word of Kamala Harris. They all pushed him over the cliff because he was not mentally cognizant enough to run for office, but he is perfectly of sound enough mind to take the entire world into World War III. This is a conundrum which I'm still waiting for anybody at all in the United States to answer. A man not fit to be president again is nonetheless fit to take the world into nuclear oblivion. Of course, the Democrats are allowing him to do it because its primary purpose is not to assist the crook of Kiev, Volodymyr Zelensky. The primary purpose is to scuttle the incoming battleship called Donald J. Trump. They are determined to sink Trump's presidency before it begins, just as they were in 2016. Then it was Russia, Russia, Russia. It was the Russiagate scandal. This time, it's bombing Russia. Now, let me make this abundantly clear. The Russian response will be swift and overwhelming. You don't have to take my word for that. You can listen to the man with his finger on the Russian nuclear trigger. Vladimir Putin has, as late as September, made clear that any attack by long-range missiles supplied and indeed targeted and indeed operated by NATO will be treated as a declaration of direct involvement in the war by the whole alliance. The whole alliance, even though only the United States and the United Kingdom have thus breached Putin's red line. All of them are closing their embassies in Kiev today, even those with the least to do with NATO decision-making, like the Greek government in Athens, for example. Only Israel has kept its embassy open in Kiev today, not fearing an overwhelming Russian response on the Ukrainian capital. It may be that they are counting on their previous special relationship with Russia to protect them from being targeted. My advice to them is to think again and send your diplomats home. The NATO alliance is thus jointly and severally responsible for a declaration of war and the perpetration of acts of war. I don't know how many shadow missiles were fired from the United States Armory, but I do know the cost of the British attack. 12 of these Storm Shadows were fired into Russian territory in Kursk at a cool £7 million. I'm mentioning the price because it's -4 degrees where I am today, and it's still November, and millions of British old age pensioners are going to die and shiver and suffer through this incoming bitterly cold winter. For the sake of saving money, the British government has withdrawn, removed, stolen the coal of their cold weather allowance. So the British people and the British Parliament have themselves to blame for the consequent reaction by the Russian armed forces. There's no point in bleating about that now. We elected this Parliament. We elected this Prime Minister. Nobody in the British Parliament, I mean nobody in the British Parliament, today objected to the firing of these British cruise missiles, for that is what they are. Let me run it past you again. Britain fired 12 cruise missiles into Russia today. And the Parliament was not even told, never mind consulted. Not only was there no parliamentary vote on it, there was not a parliamentary murmur against it, making clear that our rubber stamp Parliament is a laughing stock and treated as such by very large sections of the British population. The Americans can look after themselves. They're protected by a vast ocean, by two vast oceans. They may very well confidently expect that at least in the next days or weeks, there will be no intercontinental ballistic missiles flying across the Pacific, flying across the Atlantic. In any case, they are big boys. I'm going to concentrate tonight on the tale of the American dog. Mad Dog Biden's dirty, shitty tail is called Keir Starmer, called Labour, called the British government. And the British state is cruising for a bruising, and it's going to get that bruising. Of that I am perfectly sure. I have spoken on here many times about the peculiar and ancient hatred held by the British state for the people of Russia. It long predates Vladimir Putin. It long predates the Bolsheviks and their Russian Revolution more than 100 years ago. It goes back centuries, and its entrails bear examination elsewhere. But that peculiar hatred of Britain towards Russia is now fully reciprocated. And here's the difference. The Americans are big boys. Britain is not. Britain is but the tail of the American dog. Just 3 missiles fired by Russia would end the entire civilization of the United Kingdom. 1,000 years of history would go up in nuclear smoke and be reduced to nuclear ash, and every living thing on this island would be completely obliterated. It would be wiped from the face of the earth, and it would only take 15 minutes to arrive from Archangel, and it would be hypersonic, and it could not be intercepted. Sure, a dead man's switch would fire whatever nuclear weapons we've got that still work, if the Americans allowed them to fire them. Here's the point I want to make to you. I confidently predict that the United States would be prepared to broker a halt after Britain had been incinerated. The United States would not be prepared to see every city in the United States wiped off the face of the earth in retaliation for the incineration of the United Kingdom. And guess what? Neither would our European allies. Our European allies hate us. They didn't like us because we didn't surrender. We didn't fold like cheap deck chairs when they did in 1939, in 1940, in 1941. They didn't like us when we came back in 1944 with the Americans and the Canadians and others to begin the liberation of the western part of Europe. In fact, they never forgave us for liberating them. And then they hated us all over again for our dog in the manger approach to the European Union, and they will never forgive us for Brexit. So in truth, Britain is hated by its European allies, and it's hated by much of the world which it colonized, and it's definitely a halfpenny worth of tar so far as the United States is concerned. Forget about the special relationship. The United States' special relationship is with Israel, not with the United Kingdom. And so if the Russians incinerate the United Kingdom, it's good night, Irene, from me and to all of you. And nobody will lift a finger to help us forget about Article 5. Do you think these European countries, these barking chihuahuas called the Baltic states, do you think Poland is going to risk the annihilation of every Pole on the planet for Britain? Britain has placed itself in a peculiarly isolated position, and without parliamentary approval, and with no sign at all of public support. As a matter of fact, as we get ready to shiver through what will be a very long and bitter winter, many people are asking us quite what this government is going to do next. It has been a complete disaster. In 4 months, it has lost even the minority support that it had in the general election on the 4th of July. And now it's taken us to war with a nuclear power, one which really hates us, one which is prepared to single us out. It will not attack the United States, at least not in the beginning. It will not even attack France or Germany. It will pick Britain as its target for revenge, for retaliation. Mark my words about that. And don't say that I didn't warn you that all of this was boiling up. Don't say that I didn't, like Cassandra, cry out every week on this show about the direction that the NATO hawks were taking us in, because you know that I did. And you know that though an increasing number of you joined this audience and listened, the mass media and the political class in Britain turned their faces away from these warnings. The reality is, I expected the retaliation to come today, but it will come tomorrow. There was a dry run today. There was a practice today. All weapons and methods of delivering them were scrambled today to make us and the Ukrainian regime think that today was the day. It wasn't, but it will be tomorrow. Russian television is showing military shows on all channels. It's showing maps with the lines which demarcate the extent of the range of the ATACMS missiles, and warning everyone living within range of these missiles, which is 190 miles, that they should move and should at least take the precaution of finding a place to shelter. The Russians have begun production of and distribution of portable nuclear bunkers. I don't know how effective they'll be when the shooting starts, but it's a sign that the Russians fully expect all-out war, which will soon turn nuclear, for the reasons, again, that I have frequently adumbrated. If any one side begins to establish supremacy over the other, if one side begins to prevail, the other side will make use of whatever weapons it has in order to reverse the course of the battle. It's obvious. This is a battle between nuclear-armed powers. Neither can afford to lose once the shooting begins. So when the shooting begins, it can only escalate. The only way is up, up and up, and then the mushroom cloud. I don't quite know what else to say. Yoko Ono has re-released her and John's epic "War is Over, if you want it, but we didn't want it enough." And the fact that it's being led by a demented individual, incapable of going to the lavatory alone, is a sign of how degenerate the so-called leader of the so-called free world has become, because Donald Trump was elected with a landslide majority on the 5th of November to bring this war abruptly, quickly to a halt. And the man who leads the party that he defeated in a landslide victory is being allowed to destroy the Trump presidency before it even begins, just like last time. Nobody's stopping him. Nobody's moving the 25th Amendment and removing him from office. No one has moved the nuclear football from the foot of his bed next to his bedpan. Nobody is saying that he can't do this. The American armed forces have not taken action to preclude that which very well may mean the end of the human race in its entirety. Nobody is doing anything. Even Donald Trump isn't doing anything. Donald Trump should have made a major speech in which he called on everyone involved to cease and desist of their Herculean effort to take us into World War III, because he had a mandate to stop it, and that it was a flagrant abuse of the democratic process to have that for which he has a mandate rendered otiose, rendered meaningless by the guy whose party he defeated. Nothing, nobody has done anything to stop it. And so it must now proceed to its logical conclusion. Only time for one more observation. Today, in the United Nations Security Council, a resolution was moved calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of the Israeli prisoners held there, who number now 101, alive as far as we can tell. Only one country voted against it. No country abstained. 14 countries voted for the ceasefire. None voted against except one, and that one was the ambassador of Joseph Biden and the US Democratic Party. He was a black man, of course. If they don't put up a black man to commit their crimes in the Security Council, they put up a black woman. I've no idea of their sexualities, but I have every reason to believe that they are sensitized, conscientized to the LGBTQ plus agenda. But when they raise their hand, it's dripping in red blood, the kind of blood that will soon be flowing in many parts of the world. You've come to the right place to discuss it tonight. It's the mother of all talk shows. As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out pallid green and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. You get that on my Patreon channel, patreon.com/George Galloway. Lots of unique content there and much more coming in the pipeline. Patreon.com/George Galloway. It is the fastest, most efficient way to support the mother of all talk shows, and it's all for the cost of a cup of tea per week in the most down market cafe. Here's our poll for this week. Has Biden's Ukraine missile deal brought us to the brink of nuclear war? Yes or no? 26,000 people have already voted, and I'm only announcing it now. You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, then please like the show and make sure you've subscribed to the channel. We are now broadcasting live on TikTok. I wonder if they know. We are broadcasting the mother of all talk shows live on TikTok, as well as all of the other platforms. There's more than 1,000 people apparently watching it live on TikTok right now. Ha! Well, if you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 08081 196 5522, and the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. First guest this evening, eminently qualified to comment on all of this. He's Colonel Daniel L. Davis, amongst other things, the host of the excellent Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Colonel Davis, thank you for joining us again on the mother of all talk shows. These are desperate times, are they not?
They are certainly fraught with risk. And by the way, thanks for having me on the show. It's always a pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you. They're fraught with risk, but the risk is easily accessed, isn't it? It's easily established. Putin said if you do this, the response will be condign. We did it. And so we must expect Putin to keep his word, mustn't we?
Well, there are a couple of caveats. Yesterday, Sergei Lavrov went on to reiterate some of the positions they've had before, but made sure everybody's very clear on them, that Russia will act in accordance with its national security interest. Based on this fact, he just brushed away this ridiculous, absurd statement by the national security advisor for Joe Biden, Jake Sullivan, who yesterday said, oh, well, I mean, if they use these missiles, it's not us. We're not doing it. They're doing it on their own. And he said, yeah, that's ridiculous. We know the truth. It can't fire without your direct participation. But that caveat that it would be in accordance with their national security, I think is leading them to not take any action as of this moment. And here's the unexpected reason why. So far, at least according to reports that we've had, none of these missiles that have been fired, whether it's the ATACMS or the Storm Shadow missiles, have actually hit anything, because the Russians have figured out how to shoot them down and how to use electronic warfare to make them not hit their targets. And it's definitely not in Russia's interest. They don't want to expand this war, but if they get hit and hurt, then I think that you are going to see them. I don't consider this a bluff by Putin at all. If any of these missiles, if they keep firing them and something gets through and something important gets hit, then I think you are going to see something in the West get hit as well, and then we will have this humongous risk for escalation into direct war between the United States and Russia. And then whether it goes nuclear on that, it starts to, the chances start going through the roof, because there's emotional men involved and some irrational ones, frankly, on the Western side. And so, yeah, I do worry a whole lot about it. We just have to hope that we can get 60 more days, because I think that's the other reason that Putin has not done anything yet. Because if he can, he would rather get to a place where he at least has a partner that's willing to talk to him, because President Biden has not been willing to. And how can you get anything done if you're not even willing to talk to somebody that you want to have a deal with? And that's one of our biggest failures, I believe.
Well, I want to come to that, Colonel, but are you telling me that the British taxpayer just spent £7 million in the firing of 12 Storm Shadow missiles none of which hit anything?
According to the information we have so far, that is the report. It's always subject to change, and once they start getting some satellite imagery, perhaps that could change. But as of right now, nothing has been hit of any substance.
It's the very definition of burning money, isn't it? Let's move then to the second track that you referred to, Colonel. This is all being done to torpedo the second Trump presidency, isn't it?
Whether it was intentional or not, that is definitely the risk that we're facing, because if by taking this very provocative action, and that's, by the way, was accelerated a little more today when President Biden authorized the use of certain kinds of landmines that violate our own policy that we had not done. So it really does give the impression that they are trying to stoke something up so that the United States could not reach any kind of a negotiated settlement. You had the NATO Secretary General Rutte yesterday still claiming that we're going to give all this stuff that we can to the Ukraine side so that they can prevail, so that Russia will lose. And I've just got to tell you, I don't know what kind of delusional mentality could be going on in Brussels when they're still talking about victory, when the only question is how bad is Ukraine going to lose, not whether.
Well, you're an eminent soldier. Even I was a boy soldier. Mark Rutte of NATO is a former perfume salesman and a failed politician in the mighty Netherlands. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. He has no background knowledge, experience. He's never heard a gun fired in anger because, of course, he's against hunting. But the truth is, these NATO wallas, and Rutte himself said that he would personally expel the United States from NATO if it abandoned Ukraine. They are living in a land of delusion, are they not?
Well, I would imagine that President Trump might be happy to hear that if he thinks that NATO wants to let go of the United States and all the money and all the support that we have provided. I think most of them are actually afraid that might happen. But if he wants to go down that path, I mean, why not? And that really highlights another issue that is very much related to this, and that is if the Western European countries are so concerned about whether or not Ukraine wins or loses, then one would wonder why they're not giving out a whole lot more support. And I'm not just talking about money, but I'm talking about military support. And the fact that they don't want to diminish their own national resources and their own defense capacity, in my view, puts the truth to what they really believe, and that they don't think that Russia is going to come roll into the West, that they're going to roll through Ukraine, that they're going to hit into the Baltics or the Poland or anything else, because they don't have the capacity or the interest to do that. What they do want is security on their border, and that's what they have been unambiguous about since before the war, all the way back to 2014 and beyond, really, all the way back to 2008. When the NATO expansion was going on, Russia said, this is our red line. This is the problem. And it's not just NATO on the border, which they do have in the Baltics. As bad as that is, NATO in Ukraine has always been the non-negotiable, because it is on a plane that has basically an arrow pointing right to Moscow that a ground force could use if they wanted to invade, which has happened twice before in the previous 2 centuries. So it's a real big issue for Russia, and something that's well known by our side. So I don't know why we keep thinking that Russia would respond differently than we would if it was Russia or China on a direct path to either London or Washington.
Now, on that subject of Washington, Colonel, this is, by any measure, you said 60 days. We had a Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, I wish he was here now, who said a week's a long time in politics. And that's when things moved a lot slower than they do today. Joe Biden and his administration, whoever's working him, whoever's operating his buttons, can do a lot of damage in 60 days without having to take responsibility for any of the consequences of what they do. Isn't there something fundamentally undemocratic about that? And why doesn't somebody do something about it?
Well, it is certainly, it's both unprecedented and it's irrational, and it's, you can even, I think, go so far as to say unethical, because you're taking action, and you're right. I totally agree that 60 days might seem short in one circumstance, but it's an eternity in another, especially you see the speed with which the administration first let the long-range missiles go, and now that it's today added this issue of the landmines, etc. And I actually published a piece earlier this afternoon in the National Interest warning about these very issues right now. Because if anything happens because of these actions, it's not going to be the Biden administration that has to pay the price for it. It's going to be tying the hands of the Trump administration, who was voted by the American people to come in and bring peace to the situation. He declared he would do that in stark contrast to his opponent, and that's why and one of the reasons anyway, why the American people voted for him. And for now then, this administration, the outgoing, to take action which could precipitate an expansion of the war so that it would prevent the incoming administration to do what the people of America hired him to do, I think is very problematic and alarming. And it's unfortunately not just in this theater. You can also look at what's going on in the Middle East, and it's not at all uncertain that thing couldn't explode in the next 60 days as well, also tying Trump's hands into some real problems, of course, and that means throwing it on all of our backs in the United States. So there is some real trouble and some real problems. The problem is that there's no mechanisms by which you can, other than complain. You can't see it because this has never happened. There's no systems in place that would say, all right, if an outgoing administration does this, then you can do that, because it's never happened. We've just acted normal up until this point, to where you try to get a transition from the time of the election until the time of the inauguration. And this is very much breaking with precedent and history and just good manners.
Yeah, good manners, but something has to be done about it. You've got far too long an interregnum between the 5th of November and the 20th of January. It could be told if the incoming administration knew that the outgoing administration would not do anything that would fundamentally wreck the election program of the election winners. But now that we have this situation, it seems to me something that Donald Trump needs to put on the agenda. Now, it's Mad Dog Biden's birthday today, I see. Barack Obama has just wished him a happy birthday. I don't know how sincerely. Would this not be, once he'd eaten his cake, would this not be a good time to raise the issue of the 25th Amendment? Whether Joe Biden is still fit to carry out his duties?
Well, you listen, just based on the actions and the things that we've seen, and I'm not talking about just in the last week, but gracious, I mean, you can go back into most of the last year and ask a lot of those very valid questions. But, you know, the political reality, I don't have to tell you, you know better than I do, is that in the next 60 days, nobody on the Democratic side would dare to do that, with the possible exception of, and I will say that there's a sliver of a possibility here, that Biden could say, oh, you know what, I can't really finish out, so I'm going to hand off to Kamala Harris and let her become the first woman president, so she'll actually break through that, etc. You know, so that would certainly make a lot of Democrats happy to finally get in there by whatever means necessary, however short it might be. But I really, really hope that they aren't going to actually do that, because the turmoil would be incredible. And I'm just promising you, you don't want to have Kamala Harris be a temporary president with all of the decision-making powers when you have the two potential wars brewing on the side burners.
Now, when you put it like that, Colonel, you're probably right. Let me rescind my previous suggestion. What do you think of the show so far? What do you think of Trump's interim cabinet and the appointments he's made to date?
Well, I gotta admit, some of them have been eyebrow raising. Some of it's unclear how. I get that their mentality and their focus, and there's certainly their loyalty to the Trump focus is certainly there. But there are some others, and I'll just hold up Tulsi Gabbard as the primary one. Even though she's been vilified in some quarters of the United States, she is absolutely, in my view, the absolute perfect and best selection that he's made so far. I would have actually and did actually suggest that she should have been Secretary of State, where she could do the most good, because she's number one, she's a combat veteran. She's still a serving lieutenant colonel, but she has been outspoken from the time she was a Democratic member of Congress, willing to talk to anyone to try to bring peace. She has always been saying, I'll do whatever it takes to end wars, to not fight stupid wars, and to bring peace to those that were fighting. And she has definitely wanted to do that here, which is why I think Trump selected her for this Director of National Intelligence, because that is a hugely important issue. And then there's some others like the Tom Homan, I think, of the Border Patrol, and because he's been with the Border Patrol before, so I think he's eminently qualified for that, and he's definitely tied into the Trump agenda. So I think by and large it's good, but like Pete Hegseth, he's got a military background. He's fought with heroism in uniform during combat, and that's all great. But I'm telling you, I worked in the Pentagon for 3 years during my active duty times, and it is going to be a big challenge for him, because he doesn't have any experience handling big organizations like that. So I think they're going to have to do really good on getting him a Deputy Secretary of Defense who does know how to navigate the building and all of the bureaucracy that goes with that. And if so, then I think he might be all right.
Well, may I be the first to propose your good self, sir, Colonel Daniel L. Davis, host of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive and all-round officer and gentleman. Thank you, Colonel, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let me take a quick break, and then it's Ray in Florida and Chris in Glasgow. The weather is rather different between Florida and Glasgow this evening, but the good sense will be the same, I'm sure. Stay tuned. Has Biden's Ukraine missile deal brought us to the brink of nuclear war? Yes or no? 27,599 of you have voted so far. Let's get that over 30,000 just so we can say it was a very big survey indeed. Let's go to Florida. Who wouldn't when it's 4 degrees below outside here? It's Ray in Florida on Russia. Go ahead, Ray.
Thank you, George. I'm a first-time caller, and there are so many multiple tsunamis of bad news coming to us every day that it's hard to pick one. But what stands out to me is this nuclear plant in Kursk, which the Ukrainians already made one run at, and they were pushed back. And now that they have longer-range missiles, well, maybe they won't have to run the troops. They can just push a button. And as the great Dr. Christopher Busby pointed out in an article in Sputnik not long ago, the RBMK reactors don't have the level of containment that other modern reactors have. So what might be just a broken fingernail, to those Zaporizhia plants, which are gigantic and look like indestructible, it might not be the same situation in Kursk. And I think hopefully we can bang the drum on that. And I know...
Well, you're quite right to do so, Ray. An ATACMS or a storm shadow going through the roof of the Kursk nuclear reactor in Russia will mean that Britain or the United States or both had just exploded a nuclear bomb in Russia. There's no going back from that, Ray, is there?
No, it could start the chain of events that ends in a great white flash. Are you familiar with Chris Busby's work?
No, I'm not.
Well, he does write for Sputnik, so I imagine you could reach him through there. He's in his 80s. He lives in the woods.
It would be a crime for me to read Sputnik, Ray. You're talking to someone here in the land of the free, the United Kingdom, where I'd be committing a crime by reading an article in Sputnik. Ray, thanks for the advice, though. Ray in Florida on Russia. Chris is in Glasgow. They're on the very same subject. Chris, what do you want to say?
Good evening, George. How are you doing? Hope you're okay. Thank you for taking my call.
All good.
I was just wanting to ask given what I've heard from Colonel Davis, do you feel there's maybe a bit more leeway with President Putin not attacking Britain if they're taking out all the missiles that are coming into the Russian Federation? And can I just ask you a quick question on Gaza and the Middle East as well? As we all know, Israel is an apartheid state, or Gaza is an apartheid state. So we all remember the outrage in the 80s and 90s when it was apartheid in South Africa. I just want to know, from your perspective, why is there not the same outrage about that there was in South Africa, considering Israel was nothing merely more than that outpost since 1948?
Yeah, well, we were first of all, more of us were more motivated then than we are now, Chris. No self-respecting person would have dreamt of buying the produce of apartheid South Africa. But that is sadly not the case in the Britain that we have today. The department store in Dublin, which went on strike rather than handle the goods of apartheid state produce, no such workplace today would take the same attitude to the apartheid state of Israel. So I'm afraid we've gone backwards in that regard. It's been a long way back, I think, and it's a matter of great regret to me. The truth is, not until we have reached the levels of boycott, divestment, sanctions, ostracism of the apartheid state of Israel that we had over the apartheid state of South Africa will we prevail. And we are quite a long way short of that. Because we, people like you and me, talk to each other, support each other, and encourage each other, we don't notice the people who are still going into McDonald's. We don't notice the people who are still going into Starbucks. And they are many, and we are few by comparison. Many of us, not me I should quickly add, have family members going in to purchase goods that are on the boycott list at the very top of the boycott list. We've got family members, never mind friends, workmates, acquaintances, people we sit next to at the football, and so on. We have to redouble our efforts. On the 29th of this month, I'll be in Rochdale for the raising of the Palestinian flag on the town hall. I think it'll be the first raising of a Palestinian flag on a town hall since I secured the raising of a Palestinian flag on the town hall in Dundee 44 years ago. 44 years have gone by. And Rochdale will be, and I salute them for their great achievement, Rochdale will be the next in line. As to your first point, I sat with President Putin but 3 weeks ago, less than 3 weeks ago, in Kazan, in Russia, at the BRICS conference. And I'm here to tell you, I don't think so. We'll see if I'm right. We'll see if I'm wrong. Colonel Davis is clearly a more optimistic fellow than mine, but then he is defended by two vast oceans. We are not. Thanks, Chris. Now, this week on the podcast, this is just astonishing. This week we're in the top 10 in Pakistan, Qatar, and number 1 in Mauritius. We're still charting in Israel, and we're in the top 5 in Guatemala too. You can download the Moats podcast by scanning the QR code in the corner of your screen now. Let's go to Terence in England, in Corby, on Putin and World War III. What's up, Tel?
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Glad tidings to you and your family. Well, I don't know whether you're aware, I'm sure you are aware of the fact that they decommissioned helicopters, but the British public are unaware that they bought 4 rubber dinghies from Toys R Us, I think, and they're going to send them out to the Arctic Circle to circle the Russians. But on that happier note, I like to say that, like Lenin, who I've read all my life about the great man, the great thinker that Lenin was, he happened to have an admiration for the British public. And when you look at less than just about 30% have voted in this dog dirt to run this country called Great Britain for a reason, because the British people are great, the Russian people are great. I think Mr. Putin will really not think about the nuclear end of the world where Britain's concerned, and I don't particularly worry about Europe. They have their own little things that go around each country, like yourself. But I really believe that Putin thinks more of the British people than the British people think of their government, and you know how low that is. What say you?
Yeah, well, because you get the government that you vote for. I mean, if you don't mind me saying so, Terence, it's a bit of a cop-out. We could have voted in a different government, but we didn't. It's all very well saying only a third of us who voted for the dog dirt that is Keir Starmer, but he got a landslide majority, and he is in complete power in the United Kingdom. So if the United Kingdom is firing cruise missiles at Russia, what do you think Russia is going to do in return? They're not going to say, well, we like that Terence and Corby, and that Galloway, he's not a bad fella either. And we did serve on the Atlantic convoys together in World War II, and John McLean and Willie Gallagher and the great movement to get hands off Russia in the period of the War of Intervention. Churchill sent 100,000 British soldiers to occupy Russia, and we've been at war with them ever since. So what you're really asking for, Terence, is for us to be able to fire cruise missiles at Russia, but Russia should not respond. Well, of course, I pray that you're right and that they don't, because I'll be dead just like you'll be dead. I ain't going anywhere. I'm not headed for Murmansk. And the point you make about the dump of British war material, it's a dump. We have scrapped helicopters. We've scrapped warships, 14 of them, I think, to save money. Our armed forces in total, Army, Navy, Air Force, could all fit in to Villa Park and leave room for the away crowd at the other end. All fit in to a mid-table football ground. And we're firing cruise missiles into Russia? Seriously? Thanks, Terence. Now, if you scan the QR code now, you can leave a comment on the YouTube stream. If you keep it clean, we'll read it out on air like this one. Malcolm Harvey says Biden has an excuse. He's mentally incapable. Starmer does not. Starmer is guilty of treason. No or very little British people have given our permission for this declaration of war on the Russians. Well said. And Richard Tyler says Starmer has just put all our lives at risk. Better pray we don't get nuked. Clifford Pedley says, I remember a few years ago, Russia had launched a new stealth submarine and they were looking for it in the North Pole rather, and it turned out it was off the coast of the United States. And Deef says, I think Trump will fly out and speak with Putin. Might buy us some time. Biden is hell-bent on wiping us all out, or whoever is operating his puppet strings. It's a good point, Deef. I think that Trump better get on the plane now. He better get on the plane and save the day. He'd have every right to. After all, he trounced the party which has just launched a war against Russia on the promise that he would stop the war. Captain Blimp says Blinken is operating him, is my guess. He attended the school Epstein taught at, and his stepfather was Robert Maxwell's business associate and lawyer. Paul is on the line in England, in Salford, on Ukraine. On you go, Paul.
Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for letting me talk to you. You're quite au fait on world affairs. I don't know what you like on military affairs, but I'm ex-army. I think you served yourself. But ICBMs, how long would we have here before they arrive if they're fired?
I think if fired from Kaliningrad, which ours would be, it would be one missile with 4 warheads. So upon arrival over Britain, these 4 warheads would set off 4 different targets in the United States. And the first explosion would be 13 minutes after it left Kaliningrad. That's my understanding, Paul.
I think we're on the same page. We're roughly the same age. You was born in 1954 August, so was I. Something tells me, George, that we're not going to see our 71st birthdays. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think there's a very real danger of it. I'm not being alarmist. I'm being blunt and honest. That's why I tweeted today. I see it's got a million views already. The balloon has gone up. Hug your children and pray that you're in the epicenter of the blast. Pray that you die instantaneously rather than in excruciating agony in the minutes, hours, days, and at most weeks after the bombs have hit us. That's my honest assessment, Paul. Last word to you.
Yeah, the poor pensioners, some of them may not survive this winter, may die of hypothermia. They've robbed us, the poor pensioners. Some people, if they get paid about £2 more than what they're entitled to claim the pensioners' credit, whatever it is, then they're not entitled to it. Them rockets they're firing, I think they're about £1 million a piece. So the money that they've robbed off us, it's paying for them.
Yeah. It went straight, yeah. The money goes straight to Zelensky. The money they stole from the pensioners went straight to Zelensky. And he fired 12 at the cost of £7 million, not dollars, pounds, today. And according to Colonel Davis, didn't hit anything. That is the very definition of burning money, Paul.
Yeah, when it is time for us to depart this vale of tears, I can go to my God with a clear conscience, so can you.
Yeah,
but the leadership of this country, I don't know about them.
Yes, amen to that. Paul in Salford, a wise man. There's a poll running. Has Biden's Ukraine missile deal brought us to the brink of nuclear war? Duh, I say. But you need to vote yes or no. And you can do that on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, my X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. You can call us toll free from the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. Free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 08081 196 5522. And the worldwide number 0044 203 966 2625. Comments on YouTube. Mega John 1 sends a $20 donation to the show. Thank you for that, my friend. It's 3:45 a.m. here in Macau, but we always go down to the casino's VIP room to watch moats. Please come to China and do a show from here. You and Mrs. Gigi are giant lights in a darkening world. John and Mariko. That is the most astonishing message I have ever received in 20 years of the mother of all talk shows. I tip my hat to you, John and Mariko. You'll never find us in a casino, but we can meet you outside where maybe Gayatri would be allowed to smoke. John McGirr says, greetings from Moscow. Russia will never be defeated. I'm glad that I'm not in the UK, as it might not be there much longer. And Francis Sanchez says, storm shadows to be used independent. The UK has to get permission from demented Daddy Joe. Ha ha. Ben Johnson says, when people talk of winning a nuclear war, remember they come from a country where people actually believed that a school desk would protect you from a nuclear blast. Raymond Hopkins says, our government spending taxpayers' money on arming Ukraine when people are dying of hypothermia in Britain. Shame on this Labour government. Yes, Raymond, shame on this Labour government, but shame on those who elected it. Every last one of them who voted for this, every last one of them who stood as candidates for this, every last one of them who've got a card in their pocket with the so-called Labour Party's name on it. Shame on all of them. Well, I'm sorry. It's just how I feel. Poppy is in Southampton on the US and Israel. Poppy, what would you like to say? Sorry for shouting there.
Oh no, good evening, George. I wholly agree with you. In fact, I was shouting with you at the time because I'm just so angry. I was one of the few, obviously, that didn't vote for this Labour government. I mean, the man is a disaster. He doesn't represent the British people. They're a minority government. He's complicit in the war crimes, and he's a shame on our country, an absolute shame. You've got the US running around the world, starting wars all over the place. If they're not starting them, they're financing them. Why? I'm trying to get all off my chest in one go, George, so I'm just going to roll on and try and get everything in.
No, go ahead.
I absolutely think Israel should move to the US because they're both warmongering states. You have Israel, which is the size of a pimple on an elephant's bottom, bombing everywhere. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq. Who are they going to bomb next? Why is the world allowing them to do this? It's making me so angry. And I don't know whether... Have you heard of Matt Hoy?
Yes.
I was listening to him last night, and I really couldn't believe what he said. He's currently in Jerusalem. He's making a visit there at the moment, and he was taken to what they term a platform, which is about a kilometre from northern Gaza, because he wasn't allowed to go to one of the crossing points. He had an appointment to, but they told him he couldn't go, so they took him up to this viewing point. And he said it was, you wouldn't believe there was a war going on a kilometre up the road. He said it was so peaceful and so lovely just to stand there. And at this platform, they have these long-range binoculars where you can look through and view the genocide going on in northern Gaza. And to top everything off, while he was there, a school bus arrived, loaded with children. They had driven 2 hours for this school trip so that they could go to this platform and watch the genocide going on in northern Gaza. And you sit there and you think, what are these people? Are they people? They call the Palestinians human animals. Well, they're inhuman creatures. Why are they bringing their children just to stand and watch the genocide take place? Even more, why is the world sitting by and watching them commit a genocide? And I've come to the conclusion, if the governments won't do anything, then the people must do something. They won't put any sanctions in place, but the people can boycott anything that is produced by Israel, anything that is produced by the USA, boycott it. Even social media platforms, Zuckerberg's a Zionist. He's blocking a lot of things that he doesn't want to get out about Gaza. Well, go off his platform. Go on another platform that he does not control. Get the news out to everyone you can. But the people have got to do something to stop this madness. I'm sorry, George. It's just that the lunatics have taken over.
No, don't
the
be sorry.
asylum.
I couldn't have put it more eloquently than you did. There's a poll out today which shows that 82% of the Israeli people, 82% of the Israeli people are against any ceasefire deal that does not involve the complete annihilation and defeat of the Lebanese resistance and the Palestinian resistance in Gaza and the West Bank. So it's not just Netanyahu, it's not just Gallant and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and if only we could get Joe Bloggs in instead, everything would be different. The vast majority of the Israeli public are wholly behind this genocide. And that's because Zionism has poisoned completely the mind of the Israeli public. And the best people in Israel have overwhelmingly already left. They're now living in Paris, in Lisbon. I meet them. The best Israelis could not take it anymore, leaving the worst Israelis behind. So that's explicable, Poppy. Zionism is an evil and toxic political ideology, and it has poisoned the mind of the Israeli public to an overwhelming degree into paroxysms of madness and insane violence. The real question is why the rest of us are supporting it. What's in it for the British to support it? What's in it for the Americans, the French, the Germans, the Danes, the Norwegians? What's in it for us? That is a much more difficult question to answer. I did a show, went out last night, called Have It Out with Galloway, and I interviewed a man, 79-year-old, eminent academic, professor at the School of Oriental and African Studies, who is Jewish, who is a Holocaust survivor, who was arrested by the British police under the Terrorism Act over a speech he gave attacking the apartheid state of Israel. That's how far down the rabbit hole we've gone in Britain. Keir Starmer is at the head of all of it. Poppy, thank you for that call. Coming up after the break is Simeon Boykov, who's an Australian political prisoner and journalist. You probably know him as the Aussie Cossack. He's great value, and he's up right up. Has Biden's Ukraine missile deal brought us to the brink of nuclear war? That's up there with is the Pope a Roman Catholic and do bears defecate in the woods, so far as I am concerned, and certainly the vast majority believe that it has so, except on X, where the remnants, the tattered and defeated remnants of NAFO have been doing their best to bring about a different outcome, although they failed pretty miserably nonetheless. Simeon Boykov is better known as the Aussie Cossack. He is a brilliant broadcaster, journalist, critic. That's why he's an Australian political prisoner. I'll get him to tell you how and why right now. Simeon, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Just to clarify, like Julian Assange, you have taken refuge in diplomatic premises. So the Australian authorities are not able to get their hands on you, but you are nonetheless a prisoner. Am I right?
That's correct, George. Pleasure to be with you tonight. It's been 700 days now since I've been holed up inside the Russian consulate in Sydney in a diplomatic standoff with the Australian government. So it hasn't been as long as Julian Assange, and I would say that Assange's conditions were much more serious and difficult. I'm fortunate that I was able to defect to the Russians here in Sydney in Australia. Although I was born in Australia, after entering the Russian consulate to seek diplomatic asylum, which was granted, the Russian government went on to organize Russian citizenship by way of presidential decree from Vladimir Putin himself. So it's a very good thing that just demonstrates that Russians don't abandon their own and Russians will protect their own, and which is really the whole concept of the special military operation. The reason why Russia is involved in this special military operation is to protect its people, to protect Russian speakers, to protect Russian culture, to protect the memory of the legacy and the memory of those who died fighting Nazism, fighting fascism. Only today in Ukraine's city of Odessa, which was always, by the way, formerly part of Russia, a monument to Soviet partisan hero Zoya Kosmedyanskaya. It was a famous story about her. She was an 18-year-old girl who joined the Soviet partisan unit, and she was tortured by the Germans when they invaded. And she was hung in the town square. She was a hero. She destroyed a Nazi stable and was involved in partisan action. And she went down in history known as Tanya, but they didn't know her real name. And when they found out later who she was glorified and etched into Russian history. And the Ukrainian Zelensky Nazi regime is destroying memorials, destroying monuments to people like this partisan Zoya Kosmedyanskaya. And this just shows that Russia definitely is on the right side of history. And let's not forget that it wasn't too long ago that Russia and the British, the Allies, the Americans, the French, the Canadians, the Australians were all on the same side in World War I and World War II. And now, unfortunately, the British look like they are supporting Nazism, they're supporting this fascism, and Russia is righteous in her special military operation. George, I've been watching keenly and listening to your show tonight. I just want to thank you. As a Russian person myself, I want to thank you, and I want to thank your listeners, your callers, the people in the comment section on YouTube, on X, on TikTok, and all the platforms where Moats is being broadcast tonight live for their position. Russians understand this. We as Russians understand that the enemy is not the British people. The enemy is not the Australian people or the American people. The enemy are those people who are the deep state, the establishment. And in that regard, we are all allies because Russia is at war with the same people who are enslaving civilians in the West. It's very good to see the sentiment that the people who understand they're on the right side of history. You do a great job broadcasting. Watching the show tonight, I simply couldn't have put it better myself. You're framing the situation very well, that indeed they know Trump is coming. They know that there's a change of presidency, and in the dying days, this flailing Biden empire is like a wounded dog, dying and snarling and barking and lashing out and trying to cause maximum harm, maximum damage before President Trump assumes office. It's a very dangerous situation, and I'm glad it's being called out by commentators and journalists and specialists all around the world, military specialists like your previous guest from the United States. Sensible people understand that this attempt by the Biden regime at the 9th hour, it's like 10 minutes before full time. The game's over, it's finished. But they're just trying to sneak in. They know they can't win, but they want to land a punch, they want to land a kick, they want to do something to disrupt, to provocate World War III. Rather than just say, look, we failed, We lost. We lost the election. Zelensky project failed. Project Ukraine failed. Admit defeat. Admit that things didn't go to plan. Kamala didn't win. Biden is senile. History is going to forget him as a laughingstock. They simply can't gracefully just accept that the world is trying to heal. Sensible presidents like President Putin, President Xi of China, and as for the British, I always said it and I'll say it again, that I was always hoping that either George Galloway or Nigel Farage would become the leaders of the UK, or maybe a combined effort. I don't understand politics in the UK too much, being in Australia, but I do know that people in the left and the right have very similar views if they're sensible. And the majority of people are sensible. They don't want World War III. You quite rightly talked about the danger of nuclear escalation. It's extremely possible because Russians are ready to die. Russians are ready to fight. Vladimir Putin said, why would Russia want a world without Russia? A world without Russia is not a world worth existing. And Russia, of course, has the firepower to bring down the world on an environmental catastrophe level. Nobody wants that. It's mutually assured destruction. And in the Soviet Union, in the days of the Cold War, that was understood by all parties. And people managed to be sensible. There's no more sensibility. People think Russia is bluffing. The British think firing Storm Shadow missiles into Russia is acceptable. It's not acceptable, and it's not Ukraine. The people who press the buttons are not Ukrainians. The people who set the target GPS coordinates are not Ukrainians. The people who operate the systems are not Ukrainians. The people sitting in the bases in London, in Langley, in the Pentagon, in Ramstein, in Germany, these are not Ukrainians. This is a NATO attack on Russia under Biden, under Starmer, because they want to create chaos and then make it very hard for Trump, for Orban, for Putin, for Fico, for other sensible leaders to come up with a solution and stop this madness and stop the blood, stop the killing. It's a very difficult situation, but I just want to say thank you to all the sensible civilians in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in the West in general, who are opposing their own government's policies and their own government's attempts now to push the world into war. This is very important that people speak up and people are able to oppose, and that's what the government is afraid of. They're afraid of criticism.
They are,
they're afraid
and
of protests
it's becoming more and more difficult, as you found out in Australia, as many have found out at airports on arrival. Craig Murray, Richard Medhurst, Kit Clarenberg, with whom I'm doing a broadcast tomorrow, as indeed I think I am with your good self, for No to NATO, No to War. That those who know war are against it. Colonel Davis, we heard this evening, Colonel McGregor, another highly notable military man, Larry Johnson, with whom I'm recording a piece tomorrow afternoon, former Pentagon official, Michael Malouf, former Pentagon official, those who know the sound of gunfire, who know what bombs feel like when they are falling amongst you, they're against it. But what we have now is a generation of effete, I make no comment on their sexual orientation, effete individuals who've never heard a gun fired in anger, who've never seen a carcass torn to pieces in war, who've never pressed their nose into the dirt as I have, as bombs fell all around them, praying that the red-hot, razor-sharp steel and sheets of flying glass will not cut us down. We've now got a generation of people who couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag, but they're ready to send other people's sons to their deaths. As I often put it, Simeon, you want your son to die?
Yes,
over which side of a line Kupiansk should be on? when it's been in 4 different countries in the last 100 years? Are you mad? You want to sacrifice your own children for that? But it turns out that our leaders are ready to do that. In Australia, in Europe, in the UK, and in the US. Simeon.
Yes, well, it is a big problem that the new generation of decision makers and people who are causing war, are provoking Russia, are sending weapons and arming Zelensky from the safety of CNN and BBC and the corridors of the Pentagon. I mean, these people, you're right, they can't figure out what gender they are, and they want to send the world to war. And who is suffering at the end of the day? Who is actually dying? Let's just acknowledge that the West and these Western decision makers are killing Ukrainians. They are causing the death of Ukrainians. This is the number one important thing. They are continuing this futile attempt to somehow damage Russia or weaken Russia. It's completely working in the opposite manner. Russia is incredibly stronger every day. Every day, the British use missiles like I did today, Storm Shadows. They were all shot down. What does that mean for the British? That means that Russia has adapted to the British Storm Shadow missile. That the British Storm Shadow missile, which was supposed to be a top secret, state-of-the-art British weapon to be used with the element of surprise against the enemy or a foe in a future war to defend Britain's interests, that's now gone. Russia is shooting down ATACMS missiles, HIMARS missiles. Russian electronic warfare is better than ever. It's probably the best in the world. It would be, actually. Russian troops are the most experienced in shooting down Western drones and Western missiles simply because they are the only country, the only military in the world who has this extremely wealthy capacity of experience to do this. And Russia now is more prepared than ever to fight World War III. More prepared than ever to take on NATO should that happen. Nobody wants that. Russia doesn't want war. And the fact that Russia doesn't want war is evident by the fact that Russia is fighting, spilling blood. Excuse me.
We're talking about this war, the one you and I are most vitally concerned about. There's at least 2 other theaters in which we might be plunged into World War III. In the Persian Gulf, in the South China Sea. Either one of those could take us all to oblivion.
Indeed. And then for the Western military-industrial complex, it doesn't matter where the war is or who are dying, which nation, which nationality, which religion, which DNA, which genes are being killed off. It doesn't matter for them. They don't differentiate. They only care that their share prices are going up, that Raytheon, that Lockheed, that Boeing are continuing to supply weapons to replace old weapons. Use the old weapons. Send the old mines. Send the banned weapons. Send the banned mines. Because guess what? It's good for business. It's good for Wall Street. It's good for London, New York, Berlin, Paris. They all make money. Rheinmetall makes money. Everybody makes money on the back of the deaths of other nations' people. Not Americans, not British, not Germans, and not French people. And this is what NATO is all about. And that's unfortunately, Russia is being very honorable in carrying this fight with conventional methods. Russians are choosing to show, you could say, military honor. It's almost as though, George, we look back at the old battles of the olden days where 2 armies would line up and then they would take volley shots at each other and then they would march to the drums into battle, and there was an order of battle. There was some military tradition, and that's exactly what Russia demonstrates. It demonstrates military tradition. It doesn't exceed its own limitations. Russia has placed limitations on itself. Russia is saying, well, we can destroy you all, but we won't. We'll fight in the field. We'll fight on a front line which is more than 1,500 kilometers long, and we will take a drawn-out fight, and we will send our men into battle. We'll send our armies into battle. And Russian men are dying being killed by Western drones, Western missiles, Western British supplied, French supplied, German supplied, Canadian supplied, Australian supplied weapons. Russian men are dying so the rest of the world can continue living. And why? I'll explain why I'm saying that. Because if Russia didn't want to send, or Russia wasn't willing to send its men, and Russian men weren't willing to die and sacrifice themselves for their country, but also for the rest of humanity, why should Russian men die on the front line to fight NATO when Russia can just launch everything, launch all the missiles, submarine-based missiles, land-based missiles? So Russian men in that manner are fighting a conventional war for the sake of world peace, for the sake of prevention of nuclear war. And that's why in Russia, Russian taxi drivers in the kitchen, wives, mothers, sisters, students, pensioners. As you know, you just came from Russia, from Kazan in BRICS, where you caught up with Julian Assange's father and our good friend from Perth, Adrian McRae, who's been doing some great work in Australia with a big event coming up on the 29th of November in Perth. But as you know, Russians are simply saying, well, launch the nukes then. The average Russian saying, oh, we should just launch it. Enough is enough. Let's stop playing games. The West thinks we are bluffing. When the average Russian person hears that British missiles have hit Russian territory inside Russia, in old, undisputed pre-war Russian territory, in the heart of Russia, real Russian territory, no one's even disputing this. Well, the answer is, why should we tolerate this? I'm sorry to say, but the answer is yes. Our president should press the button and he should launch the nukes. It sounds crazy, but what's the difference to the Russians? If they have to keep fighting in a conventional war because they're up against 55 countries, they may as well do it straight away. And that is a very difficult decision.
It's a powerful pressure on Putin. That's clear, and was clear to me when I sat with him in Kazan just the other week. Well, look, I'll see you tomorrow, God willing, Simeon, and we'll continue this conversation, no doubt, along with our friends Halima Khan and Kit Clarenberg of the Grey Zone. So for tonight, at least, I'll bid you good night and thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let me take a quick break, then it's your calls all the way to Gayatri's social media roundup. Stay tuned. Well, let's go first to my old manor in Rochdale, where Lee wants to talk about Russia and World War III. Lee, welcome.
Hey, George, you okay, pal?
All good, sir. What do you want to say?
I just wanted to say, would our Trident system not be a good enough deterrent to avoid a nuclear attack by Russia? And what would the response be from Europe if we was obliterated by Russia?
Well, I gave you my thesis earlier in my monologue. I hold to it. I don't believe that the mainland European countries give a toss about Britain. And I'm certain that the United States would not sacrifice itself for Britain. That's why I say Britain is completely marginalized. As for the Trident missiles, of course, if the United States, which has dual control over these missiles, gave permission for them to be launched, of course, they would incinerate Russian cities. But what good would that do us, Lee? Because we'd all be dead, including the people that fired the missiles. You feel me?
Yeah. All right, well, another angle as well. I mean, if nuclear missiles are not used, obviously Russia are going to win in Ukraine. Could we be the next proxy war for the US? Could it be UK versus Russia?
The UK versus Russia would not last 2 days. In a conventional war I'm talking about. It wouldn't last 2 hours in a nuclear confrontation. But it wouldn't last 2 days. I hear people, Lee, all the time talking about, getting your tin hat and heading for the railway and taking the train to Poland or wherever you'd find the front line. None of that will happen. The war with Russia would last 2 days. We could not survive 2 days of a war with Russia. That's what makes me so angry, Lee. We've got leaders. Have you seen Keir Starmer in a boxing ring? Did you see him with that punch bag?
I shared it.
These fairies, that's what they are. Fairies are going to send your son and my son to be dead, to be killed. Makes me sick, Lee. I'll be in town on the 29th of November. Hope I catch up with you there. Let's go to Dover on the English coast, looking over at the aforementioned European mainland, where Raphael wants to talk about Israel and Putin. Go ahead, Raphael.
Oh, hello, George. Thank you to get my call. George, I want to talk to you about Israel and Putin. I shall first start with Israel. I've been very interested in the fact you've been curious to find out why everybody is so protective of Israel in the Western world. Why these intelligent people can't see this and can't see that. But there is only one answer for that. I'm talking for experience. I'm not Jewish, but I lived in Golders Green, among other things, for over 12 years in the Jewish community. I can tell you one thing or two. Blackmail is the name of the game. They manage to get in everybody underpants or dark corner, and then they get you when the moment comes. I'll give you one example. There was a famous rabbi in Golders Green of a special set. The son went in business, was offering incredible return, 30, 40%, 45%. Member of the community flocked. And suddenly, nothing happened. He went bankrupt, except that he never went bankrupt. He kept the money and just told them to walk. When one family particularly lost £1 million, decided to go to the police. And what did you think happened to them? They were ostracized completely. They had to pack their bag and leave Golders Green and possibly join the religious order somewhere else. So this is what they do. What do you think Epstein was doing on the islands, inviting all these important people? Once they got you on film, which, by the way, the ex-Prime Minister of Israel went over 3 times to get to the films. And the same film, some of the films were sold by Zelensky to Netanyahu to get his support of all the things Biden and family had been doing in Ukraine. That's why Biden doesn't move.
Well, look, I'll tell you what, Raphael, I don't know what goes on in Golders Green, but it sounds very much like what goes on in the city of London on a daily basis. What you just described there was capitalism, and that's what the rabbi's son was up to. Not because he was a Jew, not because he was the son of a rabbi, but because he was a greedy, parasitic capitalist. And the people in the city of London who are doing it, almost none of them are Jewish. But the point that you make about Epstein and former Prime Minister Barak is absolutely correct. What else was Barak a regular house guest of Epstein for, if not to collect the goods that Epstein was videoing? How else can you explain it? Couldn't he have got a massage with a happy ending from a young girl closer to home than New York, than Epstein Island? Of course he could. Of course he could. Could have taken a walk down Shankin Street. Could have got it on the seafront. He went to Epstein's townhouse and to Epstein's island for a reason. The whole Epstein operation was an intelligence operation. That's why we're not being told the names of the people who, when the guy who ran the show was in prison and was suicided. His gangsters' mall who organized the trafficking of minors and other girls in the vice ring. She's in jail for 20 years. But the people that actually did the dirty deeds on the island, in the townhouse, we don't even know who they are. Not a single one of them has been arrested. Why is that? Because of the deeply compromised nature of the political class in the United States, and who knows, maybe even in the United Kingdom. Raphael in Dover, thank you for that call. Monkey Boy says, Keir Stalin only supports free speech when Donut Dada Lamy is insulting Trump. Please don't compare Keir Starmer to Stalin. If it wasn't for Stalin, I'd be speaking to you in German, except I wouldn't be here, and neither would you. Ben Johnson says, funny how Joe Biden, making a member of the board of directors of Raytheon, the head of the world's largest military budget, wasn't a scandal. And Samuel Armenta sends $50 US. Thank you, Samuel. That's a big, big help. Hi, George. Thank you for what you do. To anyone listening in the United States, look up Dr. Shiva for president. We need to stop voting for the Uni Party. And Laura Malouf says we are lucky that Putin has more common sense than the idiots in the US government. He has exercised an unbelievable amount of restraint in this war. He could have decimated Ukraine and didn't. And Elaine Ronheim says, George, how do you feel about the ghastly wall that went up around the West Bank and Gaza? Was it justified? Will it ever come down? It really disturbs me. It reminds me of the Nazi concentration camps. Well, Elaine, these are no longer concentration camps. These are extermination camps. And we are, in real time, on our telephones, able to watch the extermination. Imagine if Auschwitz had been live streamed and people were able to see it, the extermination, see it happening in real time, and they still did nothing about it. Well, that's the situation we have right now. Nathan is on the line in Scotland, on the UK, US and Russia. Go ahead, Nathan.
Hello, George. How are we getting on today? So,
all good, thank you. What do you want to say, sir?
I was just calling in to kind of think about the motives of the President Joe Biden and his allow of ATA CMS systems, and as well the UK with their Storm Shadow systems, which was previously deployed today. I think nearing the end of the presidency of Joe Biden, many could point to it being a kind of last preamble before he shuts off both in his kind of mental capacity and his presidency as well. However, I was just wondering your opinions on Joe Biden's kind of motives, whether it was to kind of dissuade Donald Trump to get some last aid towards Russia or towards the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Yeah, that's about it, George.
Well, I think it's partly that. Nathan. Joe Biden and the Biden crime family in particular, but many others in the top ranks of the Democratic Party, have got a lot to lose when the regime in Kiev goes down. Because although Trump is now saying he's a very forgiving sort of guy, I never figured him as such. I think that Trump intends to visit revenge on a biblical scale on the people that persecuted him, prosecuted him, tried to imprison him, tried to kill him. I believe that one of the richest seams, one of the most dripping roasts of evidence of the utter corruption of the American political class and the Democratic Party in particular lies in Kiev. The corruption in which the Biden family themselves, but also the Kerrys and the Clintons, have been involved in Ukraine will be uncovered when the regime collapses. And they want to blow it up before it can collapse, to burn the evidence. That's, I think, the real reason why Biden is now going the extra mile. Thanks, Nathan, for that call. I mentioned my other show, Have It Out with Galloway. Here is what it looks like. Take a look. Gata will be here in a minute. She's just putting her lippy on right now. Andrew is in Nottingham while she does on Russia, the UK and the US. On you go, Andrew.
Hello, George. How are you?
All good, sir. What do you want to say?
These suicidal maniacs that are running the country. I know the masses are powerful when they all band together, but unfortunately we're weak because we can't seem to get our act together. We can't stop these maniacs from doing what they're doing in a political way, so maybe they need to be taken out in the street and hung from the lamppost. Because
I disapprove of that, Andrew, in principle, but even as a matter of practicality, you wouldn't be able to get to the first lamppost with the first politician. So we should discard such foolish notions. They are wrong in principle and impractical in any case. We're too late. People say to me, what can we do to stop this? You're too late to stop it. All you can do is spread the knowledge of who is to blame to the maximum number of people. And if by chance we avoid nuclear conflagration, we build a movement in the country so big that the politicians have to listen to it. That's what I'm trying to do. My advice to you is not to go looking for a lamppost to hang people from. Join the Workers' Party of Britain. Join No to NATO, No to War. Come to our meeting online tomorrow night on all platforms, but YouTube in particular. Come along, get involved. That's the only way we're going to change things, if we survive long enough for that to even be possible. Z.A. Lucasade says Haaretz reported that Israel is using gangs from ISIS to loot the aid trucks in Gaza. And Ben Johnson says there are twice as many evangelical Christian Zionists in America as Jews in the entire world. That's absolutely correct. And MK says, I voted no on the poll because I believe Putin is too wise to send nuclear weapons in response to the latest missile attack, which proved fruitless. The West is showing its weakness. And Monkey Boy says Ukrainians collaborated with the Nazis. Some were even concentration camp guards. Monkey Boy was much, much worse than that. Babi Yar, one of the most bestial acts ever committed by human beings in the whole history of humanity, was carried out by Ukrainians. They murdered up close and personal, close enough to see the blood spurting, to smell the death in their own nostrils, standing on the bodies and finishing them off. 1 million victims of the Holocaust in the East were murdered by Ukrainians, the same kind of Ukrainians that our government is now arming and proselytizing for. They don't try and conceal it. You heard from Simeon. They're destroying monuments to Ukrainian partisans who fought against the beasts, who did the filthiest work for the SS Einsatzgruppen. They're calling streets after SS generals. And our government is supporting that, funding that. Our pensioners are being robbed in order to fund that. That's how bad it is. Jack Plugman, great name, says Kit's new article on Grey Zone exposing UK complicity in the terrorism in Russia par excellence. Indeed, I've been praising it to the highest and will do again tomorrow evening when Kit joins us on No to NATO, No to War, and I'm sure he'll tell us even more about it. It is a brilliant piece of investigative reporting, and the Grey Zone is without peer anywhere in the world as a portal, as a platform for getting to the truth of these matters. My good wife is in the house, in the building, and at the same desk as me. I'm glad to say, Gayatri, what's rattling?
It is day 410 of the genocide in Gaza. Today, the 20th of November, is also World Children's Day. Although they are not celebrating much of it in Gaza, children are being bombed from wherever they cannot see. They are bleeding to death on the hospital floors because there are almost no hospitals left. They are being burned to death in refugee camps.
In tents.
They are forced to go through the rubble to find family members. Children are forced to become guardians of their own children. It is not much of a Children's Day. It was firstly established in 1954 by the United Nations, and it went all the way onwards to an actual Convention of the Rights of the Child in 1989. It was ratified by all countries, all 196 of them, making this convention the most ratified human rights treaty, bar one. Bar one country. It was ratified by all countries, bar one.
United States?
United States. The same country that today vetoed alone against the UN Security Council resolution on the Gaza ceasefire. Not for the first time, not for the second time, not for the third time, but the fourth time. I mean, I know it's just a ceasefire for us. For us, this is not sufficient, but even that is being vetoed. What is the point of all?
You see how they sent a black man to do it? To raise his hand and veto it? What kind of people are there that do this bidding of these criminals?
Well, I think Malcolm X had a fantastic saying about it. I can't recall it at the moment. But
they'll pay one of us to kill one of us so that they can say one of us did it.
Yeah, very damning. So today we ask whether Biden's Ukraine missile deal brought us to the brink of nuclear war. John Averill says, I am no fan of Trump or the MAGA movement, but I'm in the uncomfortable position of finding myself in agreement with Donald Trump Jr., Marjorie T. Green, etc., regarding the so-called adults in the room as a bunch of demented lunatics trying to kill us all. This is truly a strange world. And Roy Douglas says, Biden, like most elderly senile people, has the conviction of his delusional mind. And what does lying Starmer do? He threatens to use Britain's nuke. Biden has no excuse, you see, because he's senile. But what is Starmer's excuse, other than that he's a lying, murderous Zionist?
Yeah, did you see Biden wander off into the jungle? I thought he was going to pop up on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. There he was in a jungle shirt, announcing what could be the start of World War III. He turned around, and instead of going down the path, he walked into the trees.
Unbelievable.
And yet this man has his finger on the button.
Unbelievable.
Give me one more.
Nicholas Jones reminds us that the Russian city of Voronezh, which has a population of 1 million, like Kazan, is approximately 180 miles from the Ukrainian border. The range of one of these army tactical missile systems is 190 miles. So do the maths.
Yeah, exactly. And what the Russians supposed to do? Just say, go on, hit me, kill me. kill my people, destroy my cities with your NATO weapons, and we're going to do nothing back? Who believes that? How could Putin get away with that? With the taxi drivers, the mothers, the sisters that Simeon was talking about. How would he explain that to his people? What, are we a punch bag?
Well, you know, you were earlier saying about that this Ukraine might be hiding all these lies and corruption of the Democrats.
Sure
Simo says, if you win an office of power, you must take it straight away, otherwise things like this are going to happen.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the many series that we're watching. If they capture a witness and then they put him in a safe house, and then of course overnight a lot of things can happen to this witness, you see. So it's a long, what is it, 60, 70 days until the inauguration of the
now
president?
60, yeah, I think it was 70, however long ago it was Trump was elected, but it's too dangerous. You know, if there's a change of government in any normal country, the Prime Minister is out and the new Prime Minister is in.
Yeah, first thing in the morning.
That new Prime Minister has to take responsibility for what happens next. If you give a guy like Biden and gangsters like Blinken and co. 70 days to do their worst, to make your presidency null and void effectively, to destroy your flagship policy, well, you're just asking for trouble.
Yeah.
Got anything more?
Well, this one, I wanted to read this one from New Scooters, which is just a perfect ending to what you just said. They're acting like the Dallas scriptwriters near the end of that season when they found out Bobby Ewing was coming back and they could write anything. Come time for the baton pass, Trump can offer little, walk things back a step and look like a statesman.
Well, for younger viewers, Dallas, Bobby Ewing, Google it. Let's take a call from Paul in Liverpool. Paul, welcome. What do you want to say, sir?
All right, George. Good programme to start with, mate. Brilliant programme. I just want to talk about this political punch and judy, which is happening at the moment. This, sending missiles to Ukraine. I've been watching a programme for the last 2 years called Judging Freedom, and these people are experts, but the mainstream media in the UK are not telling the people of this country what they're telling. Zelensky is a criminal. His secret police is killing his own people. He's stolen billions, and it's an unrighteous war. It should end. And just to the point, I believe this political madness, this vandalism started with Tony Blair. I believe he's the orchestrator of these prime ministers think they can go on the world arena flexing their muscles and getting away with their crimes. I think something's got to be done, George.
Yeah, well, I'm trying my best, Paul. We've got a candidate standing in the election in Liverpool tomorrow. I hope the people who live there in that ward in Liverpool will vote for him. He's an outstanding candidate, and it's the best vote that you can cast. Paul, thanks for that. I've got to hurry you on because there's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Oh, Norma, you always make my night when you come on. How is it? How are you doing? And what do you want to say?
Oh, George, I'm not doing at all well. I've really been very poorly, but I'm not going to talk about me. I wanted to just mention this nuclear weapons because, we spent billions on nuclear weapons just to hope it's a deterrent. Because if they are used, that knocks that on the head, doesn't it? And there's very little support for, obviously, for campaign for nuclear disarmament, very little support. We were just sort of classed as naive. But think, George, how much money would have been saved if these weapons, what I call weapons of mass destruction, had been stopped, and the fears now of devastation would be gone. I mean, I could go on, but it's too late, really. It's also too late to admit that nuclear weapons, when used, can annihilate the world because, just to give peace a chance, that's laughable, isn't it, really? That's what I wanted to say.
Well, it feels it. I played it when I saw it. Yoko's re-released it. I played it. Well, normally it would just be a sing-along that you'd hear in an elevator or in the shops at Christmas time. It had a particular poignancy for me this evening, Norma, because I realized that it was too late. The lyrics are obvious, you know them. War is over if you want it. But whilst you and I want it, not enough people want it. And those that want it, by and large, don't want it enough. They didn't want it enough to vote for it. They don't want it enough to demonstrate about it. You and I, in our younger days, Norma, were part of millions strong demonstrations in the 1980s against the sighting by Ronald Reagan of cruise missiles in Britain. And now we just fired our own cruise missiles at Russia. The difference is there are no millions on the streets about it, neither in our country or any other country. I'm afraid that we failed, Norma. And if by chance we get out of this mess, we're going to have to bloody well do something about the political class that we've got before they take us right back into it again and again and again. Last word to you, Norma.
Well, there isn't really a last word. I just think that, well, I'm just depressed, to be honest, because, like you say, we've gone too far at the moment. Nobody took any notice when we were really asking for, think again whether we need these weapons. And it isn't going to be a deterrent, is it, George?
No, of course, the point is, if you're firing cruise missiles at a country that's got lots more nuclear weapons than you, do the maths. We've got 4, only 3 of which function. Russia has 4,700 thermonuclear, hypersonic, intercontinental nuclear missiles. Each single one of which is 1,000 times more powerful than the one that Oppenheimer built and which incinerated hundreds of thousands of people in an instant in Hiroshima in August of 1945. Norma, as always, bringing us to a logical conclusion. If the world is still here, I'll be back on the air tomorrow night for No to NATO, No to War, with an all-star cast discussing World War III edition. If we're all still here, I look forward